The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council buzzed with activity. Thousands of alien beings filled the floating platforms, their strange forms creating a living rainbow of colors and shapes. Some had tentacles instead of arms, others glowed with soft light, and a few looked like walking rocks with glowing eyes. Ambassador Velthak stepped forward, his blue-scaled skin catching the light from the dome's ceiling. His yellow eyes swept across the crowd as he cleared his throat. The sound echoed through his translator, reaching every corner of the enormous space. "My fellow council members," his voice boomed through the chamber, "I stand before you today with an urgent request. We must ban the human species from all our territories and trade routes." The reaction was instant. A wave of strange sounds filled the air, clicking, chirping, and harmonic tones that served as laughter for dozens of different species. Some aliens actually rolled around on their platforms, their version of holding their bellies while laughing. High Counselor Mextar, a massive creature that looked like a cross between an elephant and a jellyfish, raised one of his thick tentacles. His 4 purple eyes blinked slowly as he tried to control his amusement. Wait! Mextar's deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Are we talking about those little pink creatures who just figured out how to travel between stars 50 years ago? The ones who still use primitive chemical rockets?" More laughter erupted. A delegate that looked like a floating crystal chimed in. "The humans, those adorable bipeds who walk around on just 2 legs. How do they even balance?" Velthak's jaw tightened, but he pressed on. "You don't understand. They're not what they appear to be. They're dangerous, completely unpredictable. Every time we think we know what they'll do next, they surprise us." This only made the laughter grow louder. A delegate from the Crab Nebula clicked her claws together in amusement. "Oh, no, unpredictable behavior. Next you'll tell us they refuse to fill out proper paperwork in triplicate." "Actually," interrupted another voice, "I heard they sometimes eat their food while it's still hot. Can you imagine? Most civilized species wait for their meals to reach room temperature." The chamber shook with renewed laughter. Even the usually serious delegates from the ice worlds were making their low humming sounds that indicated amusement. Velthak waited for the noise to die down, his expression growing more serious by the minute. "Mock them if you want, but I've seen what happens when you underestimate humans. They don't think like us, they don't act like us, and that makes them more dangerous than any weapon we've ever faced." High Counselor Mextar wiped tears from his eyes with a small tentacle. "Oh, Ambassador, you really had us going there for a moment. Humans dangerous. What's next? Are you going to tell us they've invented something scarier than the Void Hunters?" The laughter continued, but Velthak just stood there waiting. His silence was more unsettling than any words could have been. Slowly the chamber began to quiet down as delegates noticed his grim expression. "I have proof," he said simply, reaching into his robes and pulling out a small, glowing data crystal. "And after you see what I'm about to show you, none of you will be laughing anymore." The laughter in the council chamber grew even louder after Velthak's serious warning. Delegates were practically falling off their floating platforms, and the sound echoed through the massive dome like a cosmic comedy show. Councillor Hexani, who looked like a graceful octopus made of living water, raised several tentacles to get attention. Her species communicated through color changes, but the translators picked up her amusement perfectly. "Oh, I have the perfect human story," she gurgled, her translucent body shifting to a bright pink color. "Last year, my trade delegation visited their homeworld for a simple mining contract negotiation. You know how these things work. Formal presentations, proper documentation, maybe 6 months of careful discussions." The other delegates leaned in, already smiling in anticipation. "But these humans," Hexani continued, "they invited us to something called a coffee meeting. We thought it was some kind of ritual ceremony. Turns out they just wanted to sit around a table, drink this dark liquid, and talk about the weather." The chamber erupted again. A delegate that looked like a walking tree creaked with laughter. "The weather? Why would anyone discuss atmospheric conditions during contract negotiations? That's not even the strangest part." Hexani's color shifted to bright yellow with amusement. "They kept asking about our families, our hobbies, whether we liked their planet's music. We wasted 3 whole hours talking about absolutely nothing related to business. Then, at the end, they just signed the contract. No lawyers, no months. Of review, no committee approvals, just signatures on a piece of paper. Representative Kelton, whose species looked like metallic spiders with glowing eyes, clicked his mandibles together. Oh, that's nothing compared to what I witnessed in the Outer Rim. My cargo fleet was passing through human space when we detected a distress signal. The chamber quieted slightly, sensing a good story coming. There was this transport vessel, completely dead in space. Life support failing, no power. About 200 beings from different species aboard. Standard protocol says you report it to the nearest authorities and wait for proper rescue vessels, right? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. That was indeed the civilized way to handle such situations. Well, the humans heard the same distress call, Kelton continued. Instead of following protocol, they immediately changed course and rushed straight toward the dying ship. No authorization requests, no safety assessments, no backup plans. They just went. Several delegates shook their heads in disapproval. Such reckless behavior violated every safety regulation in the Galactic Handbook. But here's the crazy part. Kelton's eyes glowed brighter. They actually saved everyone, all 200 beings. The humans risked their own ship, their own lives, for complete strangers they'd never met before and would probably never see again. High Counselor Mextar rumbled with laughter. How inefficient. Think of all the paperwork they could have avoided. If they'd just followed proper procedures and let the authorities handle it. Exactly, chirped a small, bird-like delegate. And I heard they do this kind of thing regularly. They have this strange concept called helping others that apparently overrides all logical decision-making. The laughter reached new heights as more delegates shared their own ridiculous human encounters. The laughter in the council chamber was getting out of control. Some delegates were making sounds that didn't even translate properly, just weird. Noises that clearly meant they found humans absolutely hilarious. The whole situation was turning into the biggest joke session the Galactic Council had seen in decades. Velthak stood at his podium, watching the chaos with growing frustration. His scaled hands gripped the edges so tightly that small cracks appeared in the metal. His yellow eyes darted from one laughing delegate to another, and his jaw muscles twitched with barely contained anger. "Enough!" he finally roared, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. The translator amplified his shout so loudly that several smaller delegates actually jumped in surprise. The chamber didn't go completely quiet, but the laughter died down to scattered chuckles and whispers. Most of the delegates were still grinning, clearly expecting more entertaining human stories. Velthak reached into his ceremonial robes and pulled out a small crystal that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The data chip was no bigger than his thumb, but something about the way he held it made the atmosphere in the room shift slightly. "You think this is all very funny," he said, his voice now deadly serious. "You think humans are just amusing little creatures who don't understand how the galaxy really works. Well, I have something here that's going to change your minds forever." High Counselor Mextar leaned forward on his massive platform, his 4 purple eyes focusing on the tiny crystal. "Oh, Ambassador, please don't tell me you've brought us home videos of humans trying to figure out how to use a simple food replicator." This got another round of chuckles from the crowd. Someone in the back shouted, "Or maybe it's footage of them attempting to parallel park their spaceships." Velthak's expression didn't change. This recording was classified by 3 different intelligence agencies. The footage you're about to see was so sensitive that wars could have started if the wrong people had gotten hold of it. Now he had their attention. The word classified had a way of making even the most casual delegates sit up and pay attention. Warfare and intelligence were serious business in the galaxy, not subjects for jokes. What kind of footage could possibly be that important? Asked Councillor Hexani, her watery form shifting to a more cautious blue color. Velthak walked over to the central holographic display system, the crystal glowing brighter in his hand. "The kind that shows what humans are really capable of when they stop being friendly neighbors and start being something else entirely." He paused at the control panel, looking out over the sea of alien faces that were no longer laughing. "I'm going to show you why every major military intelligence division in this sector has started keeping very close tabs on human activities, and why some of us have been losing sleep over what we've discovered." The chamber fell into an uneasy silence. Even the most skeptical delegates sensed that something had changed. The mood shifted from casual amusement to genuine curiosity, with just a hint of nervousness creeping in around the edges. Velthak inserted the crystal into the display system with a soft click that somehow sounded very loud in the quiet chamber. The massive holographic display in the center of the council chamber flickered to life, casting a blue glow across thousands of alien faces. The earlier laughter had completely died away, replaced by an expectant hush that made even the smallest sounds seem amplified. The projection showed the endless black of deep space, dotted with distant stars that looked like tiny diamonds scattered across velvet. It was peaceful, almost boring, exactly the kind of routine space footage that made delegates yawn during regular briefings. "This is the Kepler sector, about 18 months ago," Velthak announced, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. "Standard patrol route, nothing special about it. Most species consider it one of the safest areas in the galaxy." A sleek vessel appeared in the display, moving gracefully through the star field. It was clearly human-made, smaller than most alien ships with clean lines, and that distinctive blue and white paint scheme that marked it as belonging to Earth's Space Command. "The UES Defiance," Velthak continued, "a research vessel, not a warship. Crew of 43, mostly scientists and technicians. They were out there mapping star positions and checking for new planets, boring stuff that every species does." Several delegates nodded. Scientific surveys were routine, harmless activities. Nothing dangerous about cataloging stars and taking measurements. The camera angle shifted, and now they could see inside the human ship's bridge. It looked surprisingly normal. Banks of glowing screens, crew members sitting at various stations, the quiet hum of working technology. Captain Park Ji-hoon sat in the central chair, a cup of something steaming in his hand, looking relaxed and casual. "Sir, we're picking up some unusual readings on long-range sensors," reported Navigation Officer Kim Hana from her station. Her voice was calm, professional, the kind of routine report that happened dozens of times during any space voyage. Captain Park took a sip from his cup and leaned forward slightly. "What kind of readings, Kim?" "Energy signatures, but they're not matching anything in our database. They're big, whatever they are." The captain's expression didn't change much, just the slight frown of someone dealing with a minor technical problem. "Could be a solar storm, or maybe some kind of space phenomenon. Keep monitoring and let me know if anything changes." In the council chamber, delegates were starting to look restless. This was exactly the kind of mundane space operation they'd expected from humans. Routine, predictable, boring. Then something happened that made every being in the chamber lean forward. The space around the human vessel began to ripple, like looking at the bottom of a swimming pool through disturbed water. The stars seemed to bend and twist, and a low vibration started coming through the audio feed. "Captain," Kim's voice had changed, now carrying a note of concern. "Those energy readings just spiked off the charts. Something's coming through." The rippling effect grew stronger, and then space itself seemed to tear open like fabric being ripped apart. Something enormous began pushing through the gap. First a massive curved section that gleamed with an oily organic sheen, then weapon pods that looked more grown than built. A collective gasp rose from the council chamber, even species that had been completely uninterested. Moments before were now staring at the display with wide eyes and dropped jaws. High Councillor Mextar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, his four eyes locked on the screen. "By all the void spirits, that's impossible. That's a Kethmori dreadnought." The thing that emerged from the rip in space was absolutely massive. The human research vessel looked like a tiny minnow next to a whale as the Kethmori dreadnought fully materialized. Its biomechanical hull pulsed with sickly green veins of light, and weapon pods extended from its surface, like flowers opening. Except these flowers were designed to spread death instead of beauty. In the council chamber, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Delegates who had been joking and laughing just minutes before now sat in stunned silence. The Kethmori were the stuff of nightmares, a species that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries before mysteriously vanishing into the void on the human bridge. Captain Park slowly set down his coffee cup. His crew turned to look at him, and you could see the fear in their eyes, but also something else, a quiet determination that seemed completely out of place given what they were facing. "Unknown vessel," Captain Park said into his communication system, his voice steady despite the impossible odds. "This is Captain Park of the United Earth ship Defiance. We are a peaceful research vessel conducting scientific surveys. Please, identify yourself and state your intentions." The response came not in words but in action. The alien dreadnought's weapon pods suddenly blazed with energy, and streams of plasma fire lanced across space. The beams struck the Defiance's shields with the force of small suns, sending cascades of sparks across every surface of the human bridge. "Shields down to 60% with that one hit," shouted Engineer Lee Bommy from her station, her fingers flying over the controls as she tried to reroute power. "They just took out our main communications array and half our sensor grid. The Kethmori's ship fired again, and this time the humans felt it in their bones. The entire vessel shook like a toy in the hands of an angry child. Light fixtures sparked and went out, and smoke began filling the air. In the council chamber, several delegates nodded approvingly. Any rational species would immediately retreat when faced with such overwhelming firepower. The Kethmori technology was centuries ahead of human capabilities. There was no shame in running from a battle you couldn't possibly win. "All hands prepare for emergency jump," Captain Park ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos on his bridge. "Plot a course back to the nearest human outpost. We need to warn them about this." This was exactly what the watching aliens expected. The humans had learned their lesson and were about to do the sensible thing, run away as fast as their engines could carry them. But then something appeared on the long-range sensors that made everyone freeze. More tiers in space were opening all around them, and more Kethmori ships began emerging. Not just one or two, but dozens of them, forming a massive fleet that surrounded the tiny human vessel like a pack of wolves circling their prey. "Captain?" Communications Officer Cho Min-soo's voice was grim as he worked frantically at his damaged console. "They're jamming our jump drive. We can't escape. And, sir, there are more of them coming through, a lot more." The trap was complete. The humans were surrounded, outgunned, and completely cut off from any hope of rescue. That's when Captain Park did something that defied every rule of logic and survival that civilized species had followed for thousands of years. Captain Park stood up from his command chair, and for a moment, the bridge of the Defiance went completely silent, except for the crackling of damaged systems and the distant rumble of the alien ship's engines. His crew looked at him with a mixture of fear and trust that spoke of years serving together through dangerous missions. The Kethmori fleet had them completely surrounded. 47 massive bioships hung in space like predators that had cornered their prey. Each one was easily 10 times the size of the human research vessel, and their weapon systems were charging for what would clearly be the final strike. In the council chamber, delegates leaned forward in their seats. This was it. The moment when the humans would either surrender or be destroyed. Either option made perfect sense. No rational species would continue fighting against such impossible odds. "Captain," Navigator Kim Hana said quietly, "jump drive is completely dead. They've got some kind of field generator that's blocking all our escape routes." "Engineering reports hull breaches on decks 3 and 7, added Engineer Lee Bomey. "We've lost life support in the aft sections, and our weapons are operating at maybe 15% power." Captain Park nodded slowly, processing the information. Then he walked over to the main tactical display, where dozens of red dots representing enemy ships surrounded the single blue dot that was their vessel. "All hands, this is the captain," he said into the ship-wide communication system. His voice was being broadcast to every corner of the Defiance, reaching every crew member who was probably wondering if these would be the last words they'd ever hear. The council delegates expected him to order surrender, or perhaps make some kind of final speech about honor and duty before the inevitable end. Instead, Captain Park said something that sent shockwaves through both his crew and the watching aliens. "We cannot escape, and we cannot win this fight, but we can make sure these hostiles never reach the colonies in the inner systems. All hands, prepare for ramming speed." The bridge went dead silent. Navigator Kim Hana turned in her chair, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Sir, did you say ramming speed?" "You heard me correctly," Captain Park replied calmly. Full power to engines. Emergency broadcast on all frequencies. Send everything we've learned about these ships, their weapons, their tactics. Someone needs to know what we discovered here. In the council chamber, the silence was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. Delegates from dozens of species stared at the display in complete bewilderment. What the captain was suggesting wasn't just illogical, it was completely insane. But, Captain, Engineer Lee Bomey's voice shook slightly. Ramming one of those ships won't even scratch their hull. Our vessel is too small and they're too heavily armored. Captain Park's expression was grim but determined. Maybe not. But we're not aiming for their hull. Look at the tactical scans. See that cluster of weapon pods on the lead ship's underside? That's their primary firing nexus. If we hit it at full speed with our reactor set to overload... He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone on the bridge understood what he was suggesting, and the watching aliens finally grasped the impossible thing they were witnessing. The humans weren't retreating. They weren't surrendering. They were turning their research vessel into a guided missile. The UES Defiance began to accelerate, its engines glowing brighter and brighter, until they looked like tiny blue stars against the darkness of space. Inside the ship, every crew member was at their station, their faces set with the kind of determination that comes when people know they're about to do something that matters more than their own lives. Reactor output at 120%, Engineer Lee Bomey reported, her voice steady despite the fact that she was essentially turning their ship into a bomb. Hull temperature rising, but we're holding together. Broadcasting tactical data on all emergency frequencies, added Communications Officer Cho Min-soo. Everything we learned about their ship designs, weapon patterns, shield frequencies, it's all going out. In the council chamber, delegates watched in horrified fascination as the tiny human vessel picked up speed, heading straight for the massive Keth Mori dreadnought. The alien ship seemed almost lazy in its response, rotating slowly to bring more weapons to bear on what it probably saw as a desperate but ultimately pointless gesture. The collision was brilliant, but brief. The Defiance struck the weapon nexus of the alien vessel with the force of a small nuclear explosion. For a moment, space itself seemed to light up as the human ship's overloaded reactor detonated against the biomechanical hull. When the light faded, the Keth Mori dreadnought was still there, but something had changed. The cluster of weapon pods that had been blazing with energy was now dark and twisted. Pieces of organic hull drifted away like dead leaves, and strange fluids leaked from damaged systems. "Pointless," muttered Councillor Hexani, her watery form shifting to a sad blue color. "Brave, but pointless. One ship against an entire fleet." But Velthak held up a scaled hand. "Keep watching. The story doesn't end there." The holographic display suddenly jumped forward in time. The timestamp showed that several hours had passed, and the space around the damaged Keth Mori fleet looked very different. Ships were arriving through hyperspace, not one or two, but dozens of them. Sleek, angular vessels that looked nothing like the peaceful research ship they'd just watched die. These were human warships, and they were arriving in force. "This is Admiral Song Yuna of the Human Defense Fleet," a woman's voice crackled through, the communication channels cold and professional. "All units, thanks to the sacrifice of the Defiance and her crew, we know exactly what we're dealing with. Their tactical data shows us where these things are vulnerable." The council chamber erupted in confused murmurs. How had human military forces arrived so quickly, and how many ships did these supposedly primitive beings actually have? "Execute. Tactic 7, Admiral Song's voice continued. "Target the weapon nexuses first, then go for their engine clusters. The Defiance bought us this intelligence with their lives. Let's make sure it counts." What happened next was unlike anything the council delegates had ever seen. The human fleet didn't charge in recklessly like their research vessel had. Instead, they moved with surgical precision, striking at specific points on the Keth Mori ships that suddenly seemed vulnerable rather than invincible. The aliens who had been laughing about human unpredictability just hours before now watched in stunned silence as an entire Keth Mori invasion fleet was systematically torn apart by forces they dismissed as primitive and harmless. The humans weren't just fighting, they were winning. The holographic display flickered as new footage began playing, and Velthak's voice cut through the stunned silence of the council chamber. "What you just witnessed wasn't a lucky accident," he said grimly. "It's how humans operate. This is the pattern we've been tracking for the past 3 years." The screen now showed a different scene, a massive space station with thousands of beings evacuating through escape pods. Warning lights flashed red as an emergency klaxon wailed in the background. "Station Omega-7 2 years ago," Velthak explained. "Reactor meltdown in progress. Estimated time to complete destruction 4 minutes. Every rational species would evacuate their personnel and write off the station as a total loss." The camera focused on a figure in a human engineering suit running against the flow of evacuees, heading straight toward the reactor core instead of away from it. Dr. Kang Minji's voice came through her helmet communicator, calm despite the chaos around her. "This is Dr. Kang. I'm initiating manual shutdown procedures. Everyone else needs to get clear. If this doesn't work, the explosion will be massive." "But doctor," came a panicked voice over the comm, "the radiation levels will kill you in minutes." "Maybe," she replied, already working at the reactor controls as deadly energy swirled around her. "But if I don't try, 8,000 people die when this station blows up. That's not acceptable." The council delegates watched in amazement as the human engineer managed to stabilize the reactor core, saving the station and everyone on it. The cost was her own life from radiation poisoning, but she'd made that choice willingly. The display shifted again, showing a different crisis. This time it was a convoy of civilian transports under attack by space pirates in the Outer Rim. The attacking ships were fast and heavily armed, while the cargo vessels were slow and defenseless. "Standard procedure," Velthak noted. "Calls for civilian ships to surrender their cargo and hope the pirates let them live." But there was a single human escort vessel with the convoy. Commander Yun Taiho's voice crackled over the communication channels as his small patrol ship turned to face the entire pirate fleet alone. "Civilian vessels, continue on your course and jump to hyperspace as soon as you're clear. I'll buy you the time you need." "But Commander," one of the transport captains protested, "there are 12 of them and only one of you. This is suicide." "Maybe," Taiho replied, his weapons systems powering up. "But it's also my job. No one touches those families while I'm still breathing." The delegates watched as the human commander fought a running battle against impossible odds, using his ship's superior maneuverability to stay alive just long enough for the transports to escape. His vessel was eventually destroyed, but every civilian made it to safety. More footage followed. Dozens of incidents where humans had done the impossible, the illogical, the completely insane. They threw themselves into asteroid fields to rescue crash survivors. They stayed behind on failing ships to make sure everyone else got off safely. They fought battles they couldn't win to protect people they'd never met. "You see the pattern now," Velthak said quietly. "They don't calculate acceptable losses. They don't follow logical tactical doctrine. Where we see hopeless situations, they see problems that need solving, no matter what it costs them personally." High Counselor Mextar's 4 eyes were wide, with something that might have been respect or fear. Their unpredictability. "It's not chaos at all, is it?" "No," Velthak shook his head. "It's a completely different way of thinking about survival and victory, and it makes them far more dangerous than any weapon we've ever faced." The final piece of footage faded away, leaving the massive council chamber in complete silence. The holographic display went dark, but the images of human sacrifice and impossible victories seemed to linger in the air like ghosts. Thousands of alien beings sat motionless on their floating platforms, processing what they had just witnessed. High Counselor Mextar was the first to break the silence, his deep voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there hours earlier when this session began. "Ambassador Velthak," he said slowly, each word carefully measured, "when you came before us today, you proposed that we ban humans from council space." Velthak nodded, his scaled face looking older and more tired than it had at the start of the meeting. "I did, High Counselor. I believed they were too dangerous, too unpredictable to coexist with civilized species. And now?" Mextar's 4. Purple eyes focused intently on the ambassador. "What do you believe now?" Velthak looked around the chamber at the sea of alien faces that were no longer amused or dismissive. Representatives who had been laughing about human coffee meetings and weather conversations now stared at him with something approaching awe. "Now I believe we've been fools," he said quietly. "We've been measuring humans by our own standards, judging them by our own methods of thinking. We assumed they were primitive because they don't follow our protocols. We thought they were weak because they care more about others than about themselves." Councillor Hexani's watery form shifted to a deep blue color that indicated serious contemplation. "You're saying we were wrong about them?" "I'm saying we completely misunderstood what we were looking at," Velthak replied. "When we see a human ship ram an enemy vessel, we think it's suicide. But they see it as buying time for reinforcements to arrive with tactical data. When we see them risk their lives for strangers, we think it's illogical. But they see it as protecting the innocent, which is apparently more important to them than their own survival." A delegate from the far side of the chamber stood up, his metallic form reflecting the chamber's lights. "Are you suggesting these humans are superior to us?" "No," Velthak shook his head. "I'm suggesting they're different from us in ways that make them incredibly valuable allies and terrifyingly dangerous enemies. The Kethmori are returning, and we all know it. Our intelligence services have been tracking their movements for months." Murmurs of concern rippled through the assembly. The Kethmori threat was real and growing, something that had been keeping military strategists awake at night across dozens of species. "We've grown comfortable during their absence," Velthak continued. "We've forgotten how to fight against impossible odds. We've become so civilized that we've lost the ability to make the kind of desperate, illogical decisions that actually win wars." High Councillor Mextar leaned forward on his massive platform. "What are you proposing, Ambassador?" "I'm proposing that instead of banning humans from council space, we offer them something that's never been given to a species so young." Velthak's voice grew stronger. "Full council membership with a permanent seat on the Security Committee." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers and harmonic discussions. Such an offer was unprecedented. Usually, species waited centuries to earn such recognition. "The galaxy's most dangerous species," Mextar said thoughtfully, "should indeed be our allies, not our enemies." When the vote was called, it was unanimous. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through conquest or intimidation, but by proving that sometimes the most illogical choice is actually the wisest one. Captain Park Ji-hoon and his crew had died, believing they were buying time for an evacuation. Instead, they had bought humanity a seat at the most powerful table in the galaxy.